Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of This Week with Mallory. Let's go ahead and get started. Hey, everybody. It's State Senator Mallory McMorrow. Welcome to our live stream This Week with Mallory. We are going a little old school today. Usually I've got a multiple monitor situation, but my iPad wasn't charged. So I've got all my notes on some old school paper. If anybody is tuning in for the first time, welcome. This is our semi-regular live stream where we give you an update on what is happening in the state, what's moving through the state legislature, share some good news from our district, and we take live Q&A. So we are hopefully streaming across a number of platforms, including YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, maybe Instagram, and Twitter. You will never get me to call it X. If you do want to go ahead and ask questions, the way that you can do that is type any question or comment into the comment section on the platform that you're watching on. Our request is that you type your full name if that's not immediately evident by your username, and let us know what city you are tuning in from so that we can get to constituent questions first. And with that, let's go ahead and dig in. I will go ahead and share my screen with you. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Coming up this week. Last week, we had the State of the State address 2 weeks ago now. My goodness, time. And if you can see here, there's a lot of text on this, but this lays out the budget time frame for the year. In January of every year here in the legislature, really the first step that kicks off the year of budget making and policy making is the State of the State address. That is the first chance for all of us in the legislature and for you in the public to hear directly from the governor on really her vision for the year. This is her high-level address on policy items that are important. And the next step of that is what we are going to be seeing tomorrow, which is the governor's budget recommendation. So the governor comes before the legislature into a joint committee where the state House and the state Senate appropriations committees come together in one room, and she and her budget team present to us. This is her recommendation. This is what she would love to see if she had unilateral control over the state budget. And again, it's kind of a bringing to life some of those high-level ideas in terms of what it would look like in the state budget. Now, something that is really important, this is just one step in the process. So every year we get some feedback from some people asking, how can I access that thing that she addressed, or when does this go into effect? What's really important is, again, this is a vision that the legislature takes in and responds to. So that will happen tomorrow. We will share some information once we receive her budget recommendation on some highlights, what was in it, because we certainly want to hear from you after we take a hearing of her budget recommendation. What resonated? What didn't? What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? And then from March through May, the budget committees get to work in the House and the Senate. There are subcommittees within the budget committees to work on every single state department within the budget. And then the legislature will present the budget in July. The legislature a few years ago set a deadline for ourselves of completing a budget by July 1st. Fun fact, the budget is constitutionally required by October 1st. That is the start of the fiscal year. But we know that many departments, especially our schools, start their budgeting process in July. So that is why we set that target for ourselves. We want all of our schools and our school districts to know what they're working with as they start to plan out their budgets. And then we go into the fall. That is when the new fiscal year begins on October 1st. So the budget that we have spent all of our time processing goes into effect, and we start the whole process over again. So more to come. But once again, the governor's budget presentation is tomorrow. I am a member of the Appropriations Committee, so she will be presenting to me and all of my fellow committee members. Up next, last week, I participated with a number of my colleagues at the Transit Riders United State of Transit event in Detroit. This was down at Wayne State, and there was a ton of coverage of this event. Something that was really rewarding to see, I think, for somebody who's been talking about transit for quite some time, is that this event was very well attended. There was a live stream. That the fact that there was a ton of coverage of this is a really good sign. I was on a panel alongside state reps Jason Morgan and Donovan McKinney, as well as Senator Jeff Irwin and Zach Kolodin, who is Governor Whitmer's chief infrastructure officer. And we were on a panel really talking about what each of us are doing in the area of transit, and a couple of big things that came out of this event. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second because it takes up a lot of space and you saw the headlines, but few big things. Rep Morgan and Representative Mike McFall created for the first time ever in the legislature a transit caucus. This is big. There are 110 state reps. There are 38 state senators. This caucus has 36 members. That is almost a third of the legislature. It is a big number of us who are going to be working together from here on out on what policies we need to put in place to ensure that we have access to transit and can support regional transit, statewide transit, as well as budget asks. Something that I shared on the panel that was a really eye-opening moment for me was last year was my first year serving in the majority. It was my first year chairing a committee, really my first time seeing this process from the position of power. And we had all of the municipalities. I represent 12 different municipalities. All of our municipalities talked about transit as something that was really important to them. But when it came to the budget asks, it was not at the top of the list for any of our municipalities. And what I said at the panel was, I don't fault our municipal leadership at all. When you are considering what your community needs, whether it's a park, a community center, some infrastructure funding, support for a parking structure that is crumbling and is quite literally a safety hazard, we understand that all of those things are important. But because transit is a regional need, there really wasn't one unified voice asking for that funding. So what I learned is, if you don't ask for the money, it's not a real thing. It felt like transit was quite literally a thought exercise, but there wasn't anybody coming to the table in the budget negotiations to say, this is really important and we need this to happen. So as part of the Transit Caucus, that is something that we are going to be focused on, is really bringing all of our members together, working with the Regional Transit Authority, with our local municipalities, with MDOT, and the other transit authorities around the state to figure out what kind of funding do we actually need to get this done. Some breaking news that I saw today that I'm going to work into this live stream is the state of Pennsylvania, Governor Josh Shapiro, just gave his budget recommendation, and Governor Shapiro recommended a $280 million increase for transit in the state of Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania can do it. Michigan, I know we can do it. We had $20 million in last year's budget for transit. And I'm really proud to have supported a federal grant proposal that the RTA put together to start creating regional transit in and around Metro Detroit, potentially with some bus rapid transit lines along our major corridors, including Woodward Avenue. So hopefully we will get that federal grant. We will start the process, but a lot more to come. Really grateful for everybody who came out to this event, and plenty of good coverage to check it out. I'm going to go back to the slide deck for you. Multitasking here. All right. Up next, the human trafficking bill package passed out of the Senate this week. Legislation passed the Senate that would mean that human trafficking survivors would not have to appear in court to speak against their alleged perpetrator. This is something that we heard from a lot of victims, from prosecutors, that oftentimes victims of human trafficking, there's a lot of trauma, and you did not want to physically appear facing your perpetrator. And because of the way the laws work, they were not allowed to submit testimony without physically appearing in the courtroom. So this was legislation that passed unanimously, which was really exciting to see, to create protections for human trafficking survivors and victims. It would make statements that they give outside of court admissible in some cases, which was previously considered hearsay, and it was inadmissible in court. There's already a hearsay exception for domestic violence survivors, and this would extend that to human trafficking survivors as well. As I mentioned, all three bills in this package passed the Senate again unanimously. They are now headed to the House. Up next, details on the Working Families Tax Credit checks. In December, and with the work of the legislature last year in the budget that we passed, Governor Whitmer announced that 700,000 Michigan households will receive the expanded Working Families Tax Credit checks ahead of schedule starting February 13th. The checks are a part of $1 billion in tax cuts that was signed into law last year, which puts an average of $550 back into Michiganders' pockets. Now, you might be wondering, how do I know if I'm getting one of these checks? If you are somebody who is eligible for the federal earned income tax credit, then you will automatically receive these checks. This eligibility is the same. The way that it works is the Michigan EITC was previously 6% of the federal EITC. We increased that percentage to 30% of the federal EITC. So if you are in a tax bracket where you already receive the federal earned income tax credit, then this applies to you. Those who are eligible, you do not need to submit any additional paperwork to receive the tax credit. But if you have moved recently or you have any concerns about your address accuracy, you can manually update it. And you can find more information. There is a tiny little link on the screen, but that is at michigan.gov/taxes. Speaking of taxes, tax filing season is upon us. I know I am as excited about that as you are. There's been a lot that's changed, so please be aware that tax filing season has begun as of January 29th. Our Department of Treasury will start processing 2024 tax returns for the 2023 year. Individuals can file their state income tax return online with a tax professional or by mailing paper forms and documentation. Something that I have learned since being in this office that I'm going to recommend if you are mailing paper copies of your tax return or really any documentation to a state department, please, please, please make a copy of that paperwork. We have had constituents call us who have mailed off documents to various state departments in the past, but those were their original and only copies. So we've worked really hard. We've had some pretty good success in tracking down some of these documents, but that's not always a guarantee. So before you mail anything off, make sure you make a copy. Do not send originals, and that will ensure that if there is any hiccup, that we can help find that information for you and that it's not lost in the mail. We are mailing out a helpful tax tips mailer to many of you. If you are a resident of the 8th Senate District, there's a preview of it here. In case that doesn't hit your inbox, we will make a digital version online and send out a link so that you will be able to access it. It has a ton of helpful information about some of the tax changes that went into effect last year, like the Working Families Tax Credit that I just let you know about, as well as some helpful free resources for tax preparation that you may not know about in the community. So keep an eye out for that. Next up, believe it or not, it is a major election year. You might be burned out from politics. I might be burned out from politics, and this is my job. But it is a major election year, and Michigan's presidential primary has moved up to February 27th. So it is this month you can vote in the presidential primary. Voters have 3 options for voting in the February 27th presidential primary. You can vote in person on Election Day, of course, Tuesday, February 27th. Early in-person voting, this is new. This is a new option thanks to the passage of Prop 2 on the ballot last election cycle and the laws that we implemented last year to put that into effect. Early in-person voting from February 17th to February 25th at early voting sites, and you can find out where those are via your local clerk's website. Absentee voting with ballots now available from 4 p.m. on Monday, February 26th. For these, you will need to submit an application selecting the ballot type that you want. Michigan is an open primary state. That means that you do not have to register by party in the state of Michigan, but you can only pick one party to vote in the primary of. So you got to stay in your lane. You can't cross over. You can't pick in both sides. So if you want to vote via absentee ballot, send in an application to your clerk and identify which ballot you want to receive, the Democratic or the Republican presidential primary ballot. Again, tons of information. If you want to know more, michigan.gov/vote. Type in your address and you will get access to all of the information you could possibly need. One last thing, this is going to sound like I'm trying to be your mom here, but it really works. Make a plan to vote. A lot of people say, of course I'm going to vote, but then the day comes up and you forget and you're running around and you're doing errands. This is sort of a psychological trick. It's proven to work. Behavioral economists have a ton of data backing this up. But if you sit down with somebody who lives with you or a friend or a neighbor and you just talk out your plan, like, oh, I'm going to go vote after I drop my daughter off at school. Those details significantly increase the likelihood that you are actually going to remember and you're going to vote. All right, before we pop into Q&A, we have to wrap up with some good news from the 8th District. This is my favorite part of our live stream, and we have some great news this week. Congratulations, first of all, again, to Chef Sato from Sozai Restaurant in Clawson. This is an amazing sushi restaurant, if you haven't been, who was nominated for a James Beard Award for Best Chef Great Lakes category. Chef Sato has worked to bring the sustainable seafood movement to Michigan and, frankly, to the country. He is a leader in this space and has brought his culinary experience to downtown Clawson. Last Wednesday, there was the first presentation of the Oakland County Underground Railroad Public History Project. The Oakland County Board of Commissioners honored the work of the Royal Oak Historical Society and the Birmingham Museum, both of which are and other Oakland County organizations spearheaded the initiative to gather research about local networks that helped thousands of freedom seekers escape slavery. Excellent efforts on this important work, and there's so much information that ran right through our region that I think so few people even know about today. We are living amongst history, and this was incredible work by a number of our really fantastic local museums to put this together. Last but not least, continuing on the theme of Black History Month, Wayne State University is hosting an exhibition showcasing the rich tapestry of African American culture all throughout the month of February. The new display in the David Adamany Atrium is called Stitching Stories, a journey through Black quilting artistry. And here's a sample of it on the screen. It looks beautiful. Each quilt tells a story embodying the vibrant world of quilting by Black women and honors their contribution to the cultural mosaic. It looks really beautiful. I'm sure photos on a screen do not do even a fraction of justice to how beautiful these quilts must be in person. I'm always incredibly envious of anybody who has quilting skills because I don't have the skills and I get easily distracted. So not something that I would be able to accomplish. So check it out when you get a chance. And that is it for the information that I have to share with you from this week. Now I am going to go ahead and bring on our Chief of Staff, Emily Collins. Emily, hello.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
All right. How are we doing this week?
We have a couple of comments. So this was fun. We on Twitter, Jacob Christofori from Grand Haven actually asked a question about what's in the works for public transit in the state legislature. And we had a couple of folks like jump in and be like, this is what she just said. So if you want to maybe repeat a little bit about just the work that you're doing with the Transit Caucus, we did have a couple of members that are watching jump in, but just wanted to see if you want to repeat that.
Perfect. Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking it. There's a ton of work going on throughout the legislature. Senator Irwin out of Ann Arbor is taking up legislation to reform the RTA legislation, which is something that was started in 2020, the last time there was an effort to reform the RTA legislation that was actually led by Republicans. It was bipartisan. I attended the press conference kickoff that was at Beaumont. At the time, it stalled out here. So Senator Irwin is taking that back up. We have formed a transit caucus. Two of my House colleagues have formed what is a bipartisan caucus of 36 members in the State House and the State Senate who will be tasked throughout the year with thinking about policy like things like reforming the RTA legislation, ensuring that MDOT has what it needs to really consider transit as a standalone effort, and then the budget process, making sure that we are adequately funding transit. You may have seen a report out recently that despite a significant amount of money going into our road infrastructure. A significant amount of our infrastructure is still in really bad shape because building and expanding road lane miles is incredibly expensive. Maintenance is expensive. Michigan, even before I came into office, spent less per capita on road infrastructure than any other state in the Midwest. So when you are not spending to maintain it, we get what we get. A lot of that could be mitigated by expanding transit, by giving people a real alternative to get around for those who want to use it. So much, much more to come, but really excited to see so many members from across our state join this caucus. And for regional leadership, I mentioned during my segment before that we put in a grant with the RTA. I supported it. And this really was a partnership between Detroit, DDOT, SMART, Oakland County, Washtenaw, Macomb County. We all came together and put this plan together with the RTA. So there is regional collaboration happening in a way that I have not seen. So very, very exciting, and a lot more to come on the transit front.
Thank you. Just a couple of hellos. So we have someone watching from YouTube. I don't have a name, so I can't shout you out, but from New York, actually. So
hi, New York.
Stefan on Twitter said, so important that we make transit funding sustainable. Great point. We can't just keep expanding roads forever. We'll never be able to afford it. We agree, Stefan.
That is true. And there will be significant conversations moving forward about infrastructure funding in general. This started a few years ago with the shift to EVs. Obviously, EVs are not stopping at the gas station, so are not paying a gas tax. I drive a Chevy Bolt. I am an EV driver. I have been driving an EV since 2017. So right now, the way that it's structured is EV drivers pay an additional $250 a year on our annual registration. But there's a lot of conversations about, as this shift is being made, how do we make up for road funding that comes from the gas tax, and how do we do it in a way that is fair and equitable and really accounts for the way that people use our roads and get around.
All right. That's what I have for now.
Perfect. All right. I will let you go. Thank you so much, Emily.
Bye.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in. We are testing out a few things. We have the ability to kind of rebroadcast some of these episodes. So I know that we do these live during the workday because that's when my staff is all here and working. But we know that that's not always when people have the ability to tune in. So we will rebroadcast these in the evenings or on the weekends. Feel free to share with your friends if this is helpful. If there is ever a topic or a question that you really want to know about, we want to make this really helpful. So I am going ahead dropping our email address right here. So if you aren't able to tune in live, but you have a question, shoot us an email and we would be happy to address it in future episodes. Thanks everybody again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.